Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you're currently watching this program, and where you can find exclusive other programs such as Behind the Scenes and Mahahi Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the news. African heads of state, representatives of international organizations, and private business leaders gathered in Tunisia yesterday for the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, an event launched by Japan to promote growth and security in Africa. Economic fallout from COVID-19 pandemic and climate change are among the challenges facing many African countries. Tensions among African countries also weighed in on the meeting. For example, on Friday, Morocco announced a boycott of events and recalled its ambassador to Tunisia to protest the inclusion of a representative of a rebel group movement fighting for independence for Western Sahara. Now, the conference comes as the West, Russia, and China compete for increased economic and other influences on the continent. A few weeks ago, the Russian and American foreign ministers toured Africa as they each attempted to gain support against the other. The African continent so far has attempted to remain neutral on the conflict in Ukraine and has rejected calls by both the West and Russia to isolate one another in this conflict. While 30 African heads of state and government attended the event in Tunis, many key talks are being held remotely, including those involving Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who tested positive for COVID-19 ahead of the summit. Now, the Japanese government created and hosted the first TICAD summit in 1993. The conference now are co-organized with the United Nations, the African Union, and the World Bank. The summits have generated 26 development projects in 20 African countries. This year, discussions around an increase of Japanese investment in Africa is anticipated, with particular focus on supporting startups' food security initiatives. Japan has said it plans to provide assistance for the production of rice. Now, addressing the Japan-Africa Summit, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said Tokyo would work to ensure grain shipments to Africa amid a global shortage, and his government pledged $30 billion in aid for development in Africa on Saturday, saying it wants to work more closely with the continent in a Western attempt to counter growing Russian and Chinese influence in the region. Now, additionally, the Prime Minister of Japan pledged support for an African seat at the United Nations by using its place in the world's body's Security Council. Japan, he said, reiterated its determination to redress the historical injustice against Africa of not being represented through a permanent membership on the Security Council, said the Prime Minister, as he spoke to the conference on Sunday. However, this weekend's summit has sparked controversy in Tunis, which faces its own acute economic crisis, including a recent spike in food and gasoline shortages, as well as a constitutional crisis which looms in the country. Now, critics have spoken about the organizers' alleged, and I quote, whitewashing of the city, which has seen cleaner streets and infrastructure improvements in preparation for the conference. Now, one local political commentator said the North African capital looked like it had applied makeup to impress participants. Now, meanwhile, the Journalists' Union in Tunisia issued a statement on Friday condemning restrictions on reporting and information around the summit. Now, moving over to Ethiopia, where the conflict fighting continues for a second day in northern Ethiopia, an outbreak of violence that has shattered hopes for many who were supporting the peace talks between the government and TPLF militia rebels. Now, both sides blame each other for breaking the four-month-old ceasefire between Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government and the TPLF, which controls large parts of Tigray. Now, on Wednesday, the UN revealed that the TPLF looted 12 full tankers with 570,000 litres of fuel in Mekelle, which were solely used for humanitarian purposes. Now, Stephen Dujarric, chief spokesman for the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, said that the World Food Programme warehouse in the Tigray capital was forcefully entered by TPLF militia, who took 12 full fuel tankers with 570,000 litres of fuel. The team at the warehouse unsuccessfully tried to prevent the looting, said the spokesman. These fuel stocks were to be used solely for humanitarian purposes, for the distribution of food, fertilizers, and other emergency relief items, and this loss of fuel will impact humanitarian operations supporting communities in the northern regions of Ethiopia, particularly Tigray and in Amhara. Now, the chief spokesman added this loss of fuel will impact humanitarian operations supporting communities in the region. Now, it was August 25th when the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry released a statement announcing that the TPLF militia launched an attack on the morning of the 24th, which ended the humanitarian truce and reignited the conflict. The TPLF violated humanitarian truce, said a statement, and launched the offensive. It must bear full responsibility for the blatant action and consequence, the ministry underlined. Now, in the latest news on the fighting, TPLF rebels are said to have taken control of Kobo yesterday, a town located in the Amhara region, which means the TPLF have now crossed beyond the Tigray region into Amhara region. And the Ethiopian government announced that in order to avoid bloodshed among the civilian population, it said the federal troops had to leave the town. In a statement released on Sunday, the TPLF announced that they had taken control of the town of Kubu in retaliation to Ethiopian government attack, which there is no evidence for. And the government statement stated the TPLF had attacked the town of Kobo from multiple directions, creating conditions so that the fighting would take place in the town in a way that would endanger the safety of the people, a statement said. As a result, it said federal forces were forced to leave Kobo town and retreat to take possession of the military post that could easily be defended. Fighting continues to intensify in the region. Now, staying in the Horn of Africa, the worst drought in the Horn of Africa in more than 40 years looks almost certain to persist after the World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, said on Friday that the forecasts for October and December show a high chance of drier than average conditions. The latest outlook confirms the fears of aid agencies, which have been warning for months about the worsening consequences of the drought for Ethiopia, Somalia, and parts of Kenya. The drought has coincided with a global rise in food and fuel prices, pushed up by the global conflict in Ukraine, which has divided the world between, again, East and West. And this has hit large parts of Africa, as much as it has in other parts of the world. Now, the WHO says over 80 million people in 7 countries spanning the region, including Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, and Uganda, are estimated to be in food security. A UN humanitarian appeal for $1.46 billion for Somalia had received more funding in recent weeks and was now at 67% funded, the UN data showed. But spokesman Lance Larke said more was needed in order to avoid large-scale death. The larger appeal for $3.01 billion for Ethiopia had received about $960 million, or close to 1/3 of the total value. Now, over finally to Libya, where the UN has called for an immediate stop to hostilities following a day of deadly clashes between political factions in the capital, Tripoli. At least 32 people were killed and dozens were wounded during the fighting, the health ministry said. Among the dead was a young comedian, Mustafa Baraka, an official had stated. Libya has been in chaos since the NATO intervention, which led to large-scale bombings during the uprising in 2011 that ousted and later killed or murdered long-lasting serving ruler Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi. Despite this, the country had enjoyed a relatively calm period over the past 2 years. On Saturday, armed forces of the internationally recognized government tried to push back a convoy of militia loyal to Fathi Bashagha, the man who is recognized as prime minister by a rival Eastern Parliament and is vying for control of the country. The country has been divided into two for a number of years now, with 2 opposing governments running east and west of Libya. There were reports of small arms fire and explosions in several areas of the capital, Tripoli. Black smoke could be seen rising across the city. Now, emergency services said a number of hospitals had been hit by the attack, and people were also evacuated from areas around the fighting. On Sunday, which is today, there was quiet in the capital, according to local reports. Now, the UN's Libyan mission said the fighting had included, and I quote, indiscriminate, medium and heavy shelling in civilian populated neighborhoods, and called for an immediate ceasefire, which was backed by the US ambassador to Libya, Richard Nolan, on Saturday. Now, that's all the stories on this week. Please tune in next week for another weekly update of events across the African continent.